welcome to Candid Dialogues with Plummer and Lorraine Baylor. Each week, we'll bring you wholesome and engaging conversations about things that matter to you and things that matter to us. We address life topics ranging from relationships to business and our personal favorite, spiritual things. Now, here are your hosts, Plummer and Lorraine.
Well, excuse me. Good afternoon. Got a frog caught in my throat there. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Candid Dialogues with Plummer and Lorraine, where we talk about things that matter to you and things that matter to us. I am Plummer, and this beautiful lady here, as always, is
Lorraine.
Lorraine, yeah. Welcome.
Well, again, we're bringing a special guest to you, and I am really excited because this individual have a passion for others. And I always like to bring someone on the show who has a sense of community, yes, where it's not just about self, but it's about enhancing the lives of others. About 6-7 years ago, I attended a conference at a college in Kalamazoo, Michigan. At that time, I was working for the Clinton Genesee Chamber of Commerce, and we were working with at-risk kids. And we went to this college at one of the colleges, this conference at one of the colleges up there. And I will tell you that it was really an eye-opener for me. And the reason it was an eye-opener for me is because I had the opportunity. The governor was there. We had some top-notch companies that were there. But the main thing that they were doing at that time was promoting STEM. And STEM, if you know, is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Right.
And when I attended that conference, what I didn't expect was that there was going to be this young 24-year-old Black female standing on the stage and commanding the presence, the attention of top authorities within the state of Michigan. And what really was dynamic about her was that she was in a field and in a top position at such a young age. And it was all because of others that led her in a direction that most young Black women or young females don't have the opportunity to really partake of. Right. So the guests that we have coming on, I'm especially excited about. And the reason I'm excited and grateful is because one, we've had the pleasure of knowing her for quite a few years. But I'll tell you, you can know people and not know people. I didn't know how dynamic her background was. I just knew that she loved people and that she was an awesome person to be around. Now, with that being said, before I introduce her.
Well, before we even go there, we just want to welcome our viewers wherever you're watching from all over the world. So we got so excited about doing all of this about our guest. We want to welcome you from wherever you're watching across the globe. Listen, go ahead and share because we believe this is very, very helpful. It's Women's History Month. This is why. This is one of the reasons why we have this guest on with us. But we are very, very excited about it. I'm going to let Lorraine do the formal introduction. Maybe give us a bit of her background, and then we'll bring her on.
All right.
Can we do that?
Yes, we can do that. And I'm just going to give you a bit because her accomplishments are on a long list, and it's awesome.
We could be here all day, right?
We're going to give her an opportunity to talk about some of those accomplishments. With that being said, I'm just going to just kind of give you a taste of who she is. All right. So Diya has worked in technology for 25 years, building, delivering, and leading in early and growth stage companies. She has a passion for developing current and emerging leaders, promoting STEM to the underrepresented and driving diversity, equality, and inclusion. After spending years in technology, focused roles and separately pursuing passion projects in DEI, she now has a role marrying the best of both worlds as principal machine learning ethicist at Amazon Web Services. In this capacity, she is responsible for defining strategy and engaging with customers to mitigate risks and promote standards for responsible use of artificial intelligence. On top of that, they studied computer science at Spelman College, the management of technology at New York University, and is always partaking in opportunities to fuel her love for learning, including studies at Harvard University, Professional School, and MIT Sloan School of Management. At the top of all her accomplishment, and I love this, is being the wife of Roger Wynn and mother to 2 sons, Micah and Noah.
Awesome,
now,
awesome.
You know, why don't you go ahead and say that?
Well, so even before we have Diya say something, right? Because you mentioned her husband, Roger Wynn. Roger is the first friend that I had when I moved from Pennsylvania to Maryland. So our roots go real deep, and I remember when he started telling me about Diya, and I. So anyway, without further ado, folks. Oh, and by the way, we when we planted a church in Maryland, the Refiners, the Refiners Foursquare Church, they also came on board and helped us to plant that church. So this is particularly exciting, particularly interesting. I do want to make a disclaimer here, okay? And we're going to actually put this as well as a recording. The opinions expressed by the interview participant are solely their personal opinions and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or views of past or current employers. We need to make that disclaimer, and we'll be putting that. But folks, without further ado, here's Diya. Diya, welcome. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you. I thought you were going to go into a story. You were going to get us in trouble here when you first started off.
No. We're not going to do that, Diya. We're not going to do that at all. Welcome. Hey, listen. Lorraine read your bio, and folks, let me tell you, just a snip of it. So she read your bio to the audience. But I think it's a good place to start our discussion. Why don't you share a bit about yourself, Diya? Who is Diya Wynn, and share a bit about yourself?
Sure. So first of all, let me just say thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you both. It's been a little while, but also just to be able to share a little bit about myself during this very important time of the year when we celebrate women. And I think, sometimes people don't share the part at the end. It's important to me to say that, I'm a mom and a married woman. And while we list all those other things because those are important from a professional perspective, being a mom and being married is very, very important to me and something that I'm super appreciative of. As described, I have graduated from Spelman College and love my alma mater and have been involved with the school for some time since graduating. And I am the president of our local chapter here in Maryland. But also, I would call myself a technologist, one who has worked in technology for many years and have shifted in terms of my interest in technology in different areas, but also, like you said, someone who loves to give and has a passion for other people. And I've found sort of my niche or my, calling, if you will, in doing that and finding ways to kind of marry my love for technology and passion for people together. And so always excited about ways to be able to encourage others in this space as well.
Awesome. So tell us, Diya, how did you, and folks, if you've got questions for Diya as we go along, I know some of you are in this field. Some of you may be looking, even in this season where we are, people are looking for career change, or if you have kids who might be interested in this, please, you know what to do. Go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and we'll be sure to share them with Diya, and she'll be able to give us some insight. But Diya, why don't you tell us, how did you get interested in computers or in technology?
Yeah, so I love sharing this story in part because I talk a lot about why there's such an important, or it's so important to uh, be exposed to different things. And so that really comes from my story. I received a computer in the third grade. It was a Commodore VIC-20, so telling a little bit of my age. Right? Um, that computer, right? Like most people have more computing power in their phones than we did on computers at that time, and I got that computer, for having the highest reading and math score in my school at the time.
Mm.
And so I didn't know anything about computers. There was no one around me who was in technology. Actually, we didn't have corporate professionals in my family. My mom was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. My aunt was a nurse. Those were the kinds of jobs that were acceptable for women, right?
Mhm.
You could be a homemaker, you could be a teacher, and possibly a nurse, but not much more. And that's what I saw around me. And so the
Right.
idea that I would get a computer was a big deal. And that exposed me to something new. And so in the third grade at 8 years old, I decided I was going to be a computer engineer. And I will tell you that I've never changed since then. I've been working in technology. I went to school at Spelman College for computer engineering and computer science dual degree. I finished with a major in computer science and a minor in mathematics. And I have continued to work in technology ever since. And so it was that one opportunity for exposure that changed the trajectory of my life. And that's why I talk about that with other people as well. Exposure is so important, and we can't underestimate the value of exposing our children and others to new people, new ideas, new languages, new places, new things.
Awesome. Awesome.
I was listening to part of the interview that you did, just cage voices with cage voices, and if I didn't say that correctly, please correct me.
Oh, you're right.
But there was one portion that you said that really, and as a mom, these things would interest me. One thing that you said was how you allowed, even in this pandemic, your children was able to take a tour. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Oh, yes. So, right. So I think in Cage Free Voices, we were talking a little bit about, just taking opportunities to be exposed. And I said, the beautiful thing that we have now is that we have technology that actually allows us to, learn new things. And even if we don't have resources financially, that there are ways for us to be able to go online and look at, different things. There are courses that have been made available during the pandemic, and specifically for people to learn new skills and learn new things. And so we try to take a trip every summer with our kids, but we couldn't. We weren't planning to go to Africa, but I figured since we're going to do this thing virtually, why don't we go back to the motherland, right? And so we did a virtual tour of Africa, and we spent a little bit of time every Tuesday and Thursday, about an hour and a half, and we toured different locations. And so we got to see, ruins in Egypt, and we also watched one of the PBS studies talking about Africa and great kings and queens. And so it was all of this really to immerse them and to expose them to something that they hadn't known. Now, I wouldn't say hadn't known because we're pretty big about teaching our kids, but it was another way to create and expose them to that information. And for us, we believe it's important for them to understand and know their history, because the world out there will tell you that people of color, Blacks, African Americans in particular, are lazy and that we're not worth anything. And, our men, all of those things that we know that we'll hear as you grow up, right? And we can't do, and we're not skilled. But then to expose them to our history so that they understand what we created, what we come from, and then the great resilience that we have. That's what we want them to understand and know that they can live into. So it was a great opportunity for us to kind of find a creative way in the midst of the pandemic to share that with them.
Heritage is a big thing. We just had a guest here, I think 2 interviews ago, Amadou Masali, and he was talking about that, the whole idea of introducing not just ourselves, but our kids to our heritage. So I got to ask this question: in your virtual tour, did you make it to Sierra Leone?
We did not. No, we didn't.
Okay,
We're gonna have to do that on the next one. We did it.
well, we've got to do a real tour, not a virtual tour. Okay.
Yes.
So that trip is coming. No, I'm serious. That trip is coming. I'm sure having gone to an HBCU school, you're familiar with the Gullah, right? The Gullah Geechee. Okay. So in was it 2019? My friend who we did the interview with, he took about 50 African Americans to Sierra Leone because the Gullah Geechee culture is directly linked to Sierra Leone. So. So we've got to make the trip there.
Yes.
Another trip, and I'll keep you posted.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I want to backtrack, and that's exciting. I want to backtrack a little bit because, and the reason, some of the key words that you were saying, the reason I want to backtrack is because there's a quote that you said that your pastor said, one of your former pastors stated, in terms of exposure. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, right. So this is my former pastor, Pastor A.R. Bernard from Christian Cultural Center, and he says, you only rise to the level that you've been exposed, right? And I do often, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I normally share that a little bit when I talk about the value and importance of being exposed, right? Exposed to new opportunities. And there's even, some study in business that says, I think it's called the PI model, and it says that 60% of your professional success is linked to your exposure. It's not your performance. It's not even your education, although exposure helps to contribute to education. And it's not your image, but it's what you've been exposed to. And so if 60% of your success is linked to your exposure, then we've got to really embrace and even, if you will, take risks in terms of being exposed to something new, because that's really going to take you on or chart you on a course. Or put you on a different trajectory. For me, that exposure opened my eyes to something I had not known, right? Didn't know anything about computers. And here, look at what it's done for me, for my life, and dare say my family and legacy. And so I think the same is true. If we don't take opportunities to expose our children to something new, it's kind of like, even eating, right? Eating foods. Our kids, for some reason, when they're young, they like hot dogs and chicken nuggets, right? And it's like, could you imagine them eating that as adults, right? We've got to, expose their palate to something new. So when they go to other places or they go to someone else's house, they won't embarrass you and be willing to, try something new. And then they'll find out that they actually did like steak, right? Or other things. But that's a simplistic sort of example, but you want them to
I love that.
Take on or love macaroni and cheese, right? That's one that they tend to like a lot, but to really be open to new things, you've got to take a little risk and try and expose them. And so that sometimes you put a little on your plate and you say, try this, just tell me if you like it, like just taste it and see, right? And we've got to take that same sort of opportunity with our children and with our teens, and sometimes with some adults who haven't been taken out of their existing environment or their comfort zone.
So that's such a great illustration, with the kids, having them try something differently. If you were to give some advice as far as for parents, what are some practical ways you would suggest that parents introduce their kids? There's the whole idea of STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. Yes, it's come along, but I'm sure you'll agree with me that it's still got a long way to go, especially when it comes to diversity, equity and inclusion, right?
Absolutely.
So what are some ways you might suggest that perhaps a parent could begin to introduce, not even to kids, but even as adults, because people change careers midlife, right? Again, if we're using the analogy of trying something new, if you've never tried it, or if your first experience has been horrible, what are some ways we can begin to introduce this, STEM to make it palatable for adults and for kids?
So I think one of the great ways for children, and I'll start there, is games. Right? Everybody is playing online games, and I have two boys, like we mentioned earlier, and video games is a big deal. Like that's what they spend a lot of time focused on. So for us, it was, one of our sons is more interested in arts, and so we started looking at ways that we could expose him and show him how he could draw online, right? Or he could draw digitally. And then we started talking about, well, he likes, what is it? Minecraft and that sort of thing, Roblox. And so, we would talk about set up a server for him so that he could try to create Roblox and do some of those games on his own. But looking at and understanding what they're interested in, and many times a lot of what they're interested in, there's something applicable in technology or digitally. And so how do we take that interest in art or that interest in cooking and, show them going online and do certain things so that they could, learn the technology. For us as adults, I think it's taking a class, right? I think you could do some of the same things like we're talking about, right? Where find what you're interested in and see what's applicable. But for many adults, it's just taking a small class, and there've been so many of them online. I know that there's a White Hat Junior and some of these online programs now that have made the early stages or small courses available for our kids, as we did during the summer. Kaplan, had some as well that they were offering free. There've been so many free courses made available, and it's just like, to take one of those to explore, right? Just explore. They're doing a lot now that we can take advantage of, and it's small steps. Small steps. But for the kids, for at least our kids in teenage years, it was making music online, and video games. That was like the way to. And I will promise you, Micah will probably never really want to do much with computers because he's much more artistic. But we keep introducing small things, because actually, the way that people are going to do art or architecture and computer graphics, all that kind of stuff, is going to require digital skill later on. Like we used to do with CAD, we would draw, on paper. You don't do that very much anymore. You do all that electronically. So even those skills require, more, and that shift to digitization is happening more. So the more you get acclimated and accustomed, the better. Our kids are coming out of the womb knowing how to swipe on their phones now anyway. So,
we've got a dear friend of ours and of this show whose daughter is like artistically, she is like super artistic. And she does a lot of stuff on the computer. A lot of her artwork is on the computer. So I will agree with that. Yeah.
It's interesting. One word that, something that you just said, that really the kids come out almost knowing how to use a computer.
Swipe left and swipe right.
Yeah. But the challenge is we have a generation of an older generation that really has not tapped into technology. And to some capacity, it has become a hindrance in some ways to them. And some of them have been forced into really being dragged into the technology world. With that being said, you did mention about some courses that are free. And if kids can do it, is it possible that those of a more mature?
Absolutely. You know what? So I remember an early job I had a few years ago. Actually, it's been more than a few years ago. But I taught at a community center computers to senior citizens, right? And so it was an interesting job for a young 20-something-year-old doing that. And I thought, wow, this is it was interesting, because what they understood of, like, we say things like, move your mouse and point and click, and there were terms that I was saying that did not compute at all. And so I understand how challenging that is. Even during this pandemic, I was talking to my aunt, and at the beginning she couldn't watch service, right, because she couldn't figure out getting online to be able to participate in church services. And so I completely understand, but I think, to your point, yes, there's some of the courses that are free for adults as well. I know, I remember my dad just the other day, like, having my son help him and like show him where things are. Now he knows some of those things, but you use some of our young people to help, navigate and help them to understand, things as well. And hopefully when we get back to whatever the new normal is going to be, that the community centers and senior citizen, center will continue to offer those kinds of courses. I think they've been a good opportunity. It's unfortunate. And so when we talk about, I know we named this the digital divide, I'm going to jump a little bit, but but that is part of the divide too, right? That we have a generation of people, particularly right now, who are being left behind.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even in church, right? Even in church, because if they can't get on and you're doing, you're doing a big service and they're like, I don't know how to get to Zoom, they're left out. And we've been having to be very creative to think about how do we reach them? How do we touch them?
That is so real. I mean, we experienced that. There's a particular family of ours. They were new just about, they were new in interacting with us at church just about when the pandemic started. And then we went online right away and they were cut off. And then the son was like, oh, you know what? I got to show mom because I'm sending these links to them and they're not coming on. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? But her son had to help her. So that's excellent. Folks, station identification. If you're just joining us, you're watching Candid Dialogues with Plummer and Lorraine. And we have our special guest on here today, Diya Wynn. We're talking about bridging the divide, creating opportunities where technology decisions are made. So, Diya, I got a question for you. What does bridging the divide mean to you?
Yeah, so this is really, and I thinking about this, trying not to go super deep, right? But I think about this in a couple of ways, and we just talked about that, right? The divide in terms of digitally with our seniors, that one generation to the other. We certainly have experienced and seen a bit of the political divide that we've been under over the course of a number of years. And the same is true in terms of technology and racially, right? There is a divide amongst races and ethnic groups, and that's existed for decades, right? I mean, America has tried to avoid the conversation, but essentially, in order to bring healing, we've got to start to look at, what has separated us. And then I think about that in relation to technology, that this divide is and poses a problem beyond just the access to technology. It's really the access to be able to generate wealth, the access to proper resources, especially like we are talking about in this time frame, the access to good healthcare, right? All of that is connected. For me personally, when I think about those divides, I understand that there is a place at which we need to be, part of the solution and bringing people together, right? And decreasing the gap and really starting to connect with others and connect others to opportunity. I get to do a little bit of that with some of the work that I do, in inclusion and diversity, really challenging us to have hard conversations, to understand, because that's really like bridging the divide between racial and ethnic groups, or the people that are considered insiders versus outsiders, right? How do we bring people together? And then the same is true around technology, which is why that's such an area of passion for me, right? Because we know that we tend not to have access to technology, or not the same access to opportunity, centered around technology. We tend not to be the ones in the room making technology decisions. And so then technology happens to us instead of happens for us, right? And so bridging that divide is really bringing the proper people that need to be, at the table into similar places of power and position. And whether that is, we're talking about, creating opportunity for our seniors, or we're talking about creating opportunity for people of color, or we're talking about creating opportunity for people who are, differently abled versus, those that are more healthy and able-bodied, right? That's creating access and opportunity. That for me is what I think about when I say, bridging the divide.
Access and opportunity, and being intentional about it. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It has to be intentional, because our nature is to, our human nature will do what we do all the
Mhm.
time, right? And so it's sort of really, this is about our bias, right? Our bias tends to be that we have mental shortcuts, right, that help us to maneuver all and process all the information we receive all the time. And so I will be inclined to do what I do, and my bias will help me to make those shortcuts every time. And the only way to interrupt your bias or to shift your behavior is to be intentional about it. We talk about this in marriage too, right? I come with baggage and experiences, the things that I, happened in my past, my relationships, all that comes to fore. And if
Mm.
I'm not careful in relation with my spouse, I will things will trigger and I will respond to all that stuff in my past, right? I will,
Yes,
even
yes.
though that's not what's in my present. So I have to be intentional to interrupt those behaviors, intentional to interrupt that process or that thinking so that I actually could achieve a different result. And so it absolutely has to be intentional.
That's right.
I love it. Being intentional is a big deal for me because, like you said, we all have our baggage. We all have our comfort zones, and
Yeah.
if we're not intentional, we want to stay where we're comfortable. So
I'm going to put this sidebar plug in from Mems. She says she's got brains and beauty. And she said, you
Thank
will
you.
love Sierra Leone, beautiful country and beautiful people.
Yes, I want to go. Is that a native Sierra Leonean?
yes,
Yes.
yes, she is. She's not biased or anything, but
No.
she's just telling the truth, right?
That's right. That's right.
I love it. I love it. So talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. We hear that word, we hear that language, AI, AI. Some people have not even heard it. They hear AI, they have no clue. So help us to get a sense of what is artificial intelligence. Well, you are in the field of artificial intelligence ethics, right? You're an
Yes,
artificial intelligence ethicist.
correct.
Okay. So, and why does it matter? Why does it?
Yeah. So I think in the simplest way, we can think about artificial intelligence is machines learning to think in ways that humans do. Now, that is kind of the broad kind of context. And a lot of times when we start to talk about this, people automatically think of movies like iRobot and Terminator and all of those, like where machines start to learn and take over the world and they can't be controlled. And typically that kind of artificial intelligence is nowhere near what we're operating today. We more talk about machine learning, where with given a lot of data, the systems, the computer program, the algorithm can learn in ways to make certain predictions or to make certain judgments or inferences. And so that's kind of the field that we're talking about. And the reason why that's important, artificial intelligence, and for us to be paying attention to that now, is that it's used in such exorbitant ways. Now, I know we're talking about it now a lot more than we had in the past, but it's been used for a long time. So if we think about when you go purchase something at the store online, and then all of a sudden you get recommendations for things that you should buy. Well, that is a form of algorithm that's looking at your purchase history and making a determination about what you like in order to be able to sell you some more. Then if you think about credit decisions, right? Like there is an algorithm that takes certain information and factors in and says, given the information we know about people with this kind of profile, that means that you are credit worthy or not. That's an algorithm. So these kinds of things have been around for a long time. The problem or the thing that's making it more important now is we're more digitally connected, which means that we are amassing millions and trillions amount more data than we've had in the past. And that's more information for them to use in ways to drive decisions. And some of those decisions aren't necessarily good ones.
Right.
Go ahead.
No. I was going to ask before you go. So, would you say that that is all the more reason why someone that does, like yourself, that does what you do in the area of AI ethics is important because of the potential for abuse?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, it's part of that. And then what I was going to get to is that we've got to recognize that a lot of our structures, a lot of our data and decisions have a history, right? And that history is rooted in uh, racial prejudice, injustice, institutional and systemic inequities that have been structured. So if we think about credit risk and decisions, for instance, right? That whole process of making a decision to allow you to have a home started way, a number of years ago when we were trying to, in my mind, justify why we could give and loan credit to certain populations. And so after the Homestead Act, where we've given people land, and after sharecropping, so this is after we've all been, slavery has been abolished, right? And we're supposed to now have rights. White people did not want to loan us money in order to live in certain neighborhoods, right? So then you get restricted to a certain environment. And then in order for me to justify not allowing you to move to this particular area, one of those things was to say that we weren't going to give you credit in order to do that. So you can't get a mortgage, right? Now, if you think about that as being kind of where things started, and we see this sort of proliferation of that kind of behaviors that then have its results or roots in so many other things that occur, like us not being able to have resources in the schools, and we have urban centers that are overpopulated or densely populated, but then we also exclude funding to those areas. And then we don't have the school systems and resources that are necessary. And then those centers overcrowded, don't get the right resources from a healthcare perspective. All of that kind of perpetuates. And so the data that then we have has already, it's the result of the systemic racism that's been proliferated into processes that have existed, right? So if we use that data as a determination for you now in the future, then it's already flawed. And so the more that we create data and start to use this in a lot more ways, we have to be concerned about it propagating disparity, it propagating inequity. And so that's why the work is important. Plus, your data is being used all the time. We have systems and platforms that now capture your data every time you do something. Every time I search, every place I go, when I use my GPS, like all of that stuff is amassing information that most of us are not aware of. And we give up our rights to our data freely because we want to use things free online. And so they capture that and they use that. And so now we have more and more data, some of it unknowingly that we're giving away to use in decisions, to create profiles about people, to make determinations about what access we get and what resources we have. And the other problem with that is that, and here again is the divide, certain people are in the room, right? There are only certain groups that are making decisions. And so if we understand that racism started with the intent of maintaining power, and then that whole access proposition, continues to get excluded from us in terms of the way of resources or whatever. We continue to have people in power that want to maintain the status quo and continue to maintain power without intentional interruption. Will never get ahead, right? And so we need more of us, more people like myself and others, people of color, women in the room, starting to question the decisions. Helping to look at how are we making determinations about the problems we solve, wanting to ensure that we have fairness around, the decisions being made, not using the technology in ways to make decisions about recidivism or how likely somebody is going to go to jail because I, with my mental, shortcuts already determined that Black people are more likely. So we program things that way, or the data already has been subjugated that way because that's what we've allowed policing in our communities to do. So we use that data, it's flawed, right? So we've got to change that cycle. And that's why ethicists in this whole area of ethics is important.
And Diya, thanks so much for sharing that. I want to go back to the whole idea of being intentional, because you could be in the room, but maybe you're of a disposition where you don't know how to assert yourself.
Right.
So you could be in the room but not say anything, or you could have a seat at the table but not say anything. So those of us who have the opportunity to be in the room, or someone like yourself who has learned how to assert themselves, can speak up. That's where the intentional comes into play, I think. So learning how to speak up, I think that's a very important thing, because sometimes, and I'm just going to put it out there, sometimes the whole issue of tokenism, right? You're in the room, you have a seat at the table, but boom, that's it. It means nothing. But we're learning to assert ourselves and have the conversation in a manner that is respectful, where I am heard. I think that's another piece to this puzzle here.
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, but you remember, there, some people have talked about this, like the, what do they say? When our slave owners would get sick, the house nigger would say, we sick, boss, we sick, right?
Yeah, we sick, right.
And so this whole notion that I've been a token or I've been assimilated, and so we've lost our mind. I think part of it, and we mentioned this before when we were talking about heritage and knowing your history, part of it is being educated, right? Like we need properly educated individuals who are well informed about, what has happened and willing to embrace our responsibility to making a shift. Now, I recognize a lot of us are responsible to help, educate and inform white people and help, shift our thinking. Well, we do need some people to do that. Some people say that's exhausting and we shouldn't have to. And I agree, we shouldn't have to, but this is where we are. And so we need folks who are going to be educated and informed and aware to be in the room and start to challenge that. And yes, we have way too few, even with the token or whatever you want to call it, there's still way too few people of color, way too few, women in positions of power really to shape that. And so that's why when we go back to bridging the divide, it's important for us to be able to have what I would call, we might call candid dialogue or brave conversations with people who are in positions of power, because we need them to be informed and to know and be part of the solution. If we think that we could just motivate this and move this all on our own, this stuff would have already been changed, right?
That's right. That's right.
And so part of it is some of them aren't informed, right? Because some of the stuff we're talking about, they don't teach in school, right? Our history books, because when we go back to it, when Darwin and Darwin theory, and they were talking about, Blacks and other people were inferior, they started putting that into and shifting what they put into history books and education so that they could proliferate a certain white supremacist thought. And so, no, our school systems and our books aren't telling us this. And so, of course, we might have a couple of parents at home that are learning this and giving that to our kids, but white folks aren't getting that. And so part of this is also bridging the divide, is beginning to sit at the table and have these kinds of dialogues with people of different backgrounds and different perspectives to really bring them along the journey as well, so they can be the advocates, so they can be the allies in the room, so they can challenge and use their power and positions of influence to help make the change.
I have a question I'm going to move into, but I wanted to comment about that whole gathering of information. And I give a prime example. Just recently, I went online to a particular place to purchase, to make a purchase online. And I made that purchase online. And, everything closed down. Then I went to YouTube. And what I found that when I went to YouTube, the very same items from that particular place was on YouTube. And we give information, like you said, without realizing it. But when I saw it, I knew exactly what they were, doing. But a lot of times we're not really aware that everything we do in terms of technology, whether it is making a simple purchase, that somebody is capturing our information.
Absolutely. So you know what? And a lot of those practices started out with the intent of commercialism, like wanting to be able to sell more, right? That's how it started. Well, I mean, artificial intelligence didn't start that way. That started with, DARPA and all that kind of stuff. But like where we're seeing these practices that you're talking about was with the intent of understanding your purchasing patterns, so we could market more to you, right? That was kind of the beginning of digital marketing. I think that the thing is that it's happening so much en masse that you just don't even realize That's why you could sometimes you think like, well, is the computer listening to me? Because without Alexa or Google being in the home, it's almost like you say something, all of a sudden your search results are showing this stuff, and you're like, well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
You know, and you didn't talk to Google or Siri, right? Like you didn't tell them. So
The
what's happening?
algorithms, right?
Right. It's that kind of stuff that's at play that we don't realize. And so again, those are some of the reasons and some of the things that we have groups really being fairly adamant about, what you do with your search history and all, and what we do on, social media sites and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they do make a way for you to close those things down. It's just not easy because
Yes,
they profit and benefit off of your data.
that's right.
And so
So
that's the education piece. We need to educate ourselves on that, on how
yeah,
to do that, and being intentional about doing that.
right.
It can't be completely eliminated, but we can, we can
Right.
mitigate it.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
you can. And you're absolutely right. Because a lot of our stuff is digital. And some things you want. Like here's a good example. I have a pre-existing condition. If I go travel somewhere, I'm in a different state, I and I have to go to the hospital, I want them to be able to access my digital records, right? Like I
Right.
remember going somewhere in the US and not having access to my information, right? Because we don't share things digitally. We don't want so I'm in New York. That's where my home doctor is. They're the only one that know anything about me. Well, that's not good when when I'm in Georgia all of a sudden and there's an issue and I have to go to the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the ability to share your data, that's just one example, right? That now we have digital systems that can share data and they can get really quickly my results and be able to see my history and know how to treat me or what not to use on me so that my life might be saved. That's a big deal. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I'm very careful sometimes because technology is great and has good benefits. And there is so much that we can do with artificial intelligence. I mean, we wouldn't have the vaccine that we have now during COVID if it wasn't for advancements in technology and artificial intelligence. That helped us get to the point of having it so quickly, right? So there is good, but we still have to be careful about these other ways. And then we need, regulation and people being aware and companies being responsible and prudent so that our data isn't just going all over place in ways that we don't know and making it easier for us to turn it off when we want to. Like you can, but now you've got to go through 15 clicks and read this and read that, where most of the time they assume you just consent when click the little checkbox we haven't read. Nobody scrolls through and really reads it. And so, and they bank on that. And that's
Right.
how they use our information, right? And so that's another part of the dynamic.
Well, I want to shift a little bit. I have a question here from Sasha, but I'm gonna hold off on that for a little bit because I really want to ask you. Because this is so deep. I really want to answer, and I think just based on what we're hearing today and how you're just expressing yourself, I'm just going to say, what motivates you? What's your passion? I think we got a little bit of idea, but I want to hear you express it.
So I think the first thing is giving back, right? And you said that at the beginning, and that's very much a part of who I am. I recognize what others have done to allow me to be to the place where I am. And so I try to look at every encounter, whether I'm in church or at work or in the community, as an opportunity, one, for me to learn, and two, for me to hopefully create space and have an impact on those that I'm engaging with. The scripture says, to whom much is given, of them much is required, right? And I recognize that I've been given much, right? The position and place that I am, for some is a position of influence and power, not necessarily the same as other individuals, but I have a responsibility to use what I have, what I've been given, what I am, to create hopefully a better place for my kids to live into, and to make a difference. And so that's part of why I do this. That is part of what drives me. I think the other thing is I like technology, and I really do believe that we have an opportunity to change things, to level the playing field. We have technology right in our hands that could do a lot of this. Part of it is changing the hearts and minds of people, those people that we're talking about in positions of power and influence. to really be willing to make the change and perhaps even give up some of their, power, because when we level the playing field, then, other people will be able to rise. Right now, some have been able to kind of keep their positions because they've kept their foots on our neck, right?
Right.
But if we level the playing field, I think a lot more of us would rise.
Awesome.
I love it.
That's awesome. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I know you had a question.
We have a question, and I know this might not seem like a brief question, but we kind of let you narrow it down for us because in the essence of time. But this is from Sasha Butler, and she said, we tend to study the Black experience and trauma inflicted by systemic racism. I would love to shift the focus on white rage syndrome and how it impacts decision-making technological business and technology, business and education.
I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around the white rage syndrome for a second. So maybe you can help us to break that down again. Yeah. So just your thoughts, I guess, on Sasha's comment.
Yes.
Yes, I'm not sure that I followed it all together. But I think, or followed the question completely, but, I think part of this really is that, it is the notion of they're going to lose, right? Leveling the playing field, creating opportunity means I lose out. And so this sort of rage is the intent of this and desire for us to continue to maintain power, right? And so, how does that have an impact on technology and decisions? Some of that is not intentional, to be honest, right? I mean, and I think Sasha's talking about a book in particular that talks about this, right? Because if we continue, and I think I talked about it just a little bit, but if we continue to maintain power, then we continue to keep others down, right? Or if our intent is always to maintain power, then I can always, there's always going to be a group that's left without, right? And so it talks, and there is a book, I think it's called I think the title of it is actually White Rage, The Unspoken Truth. And it talks about, part of the racial divide, it is really as a result of this sort of intent to maintain, a power and control, and being willing to do, anything for that, right? And so, like, again, I think that is part and parcel of what we see systemically, in our country, and our laws, and our policies, and our approach to engagement, and certainly it's going to show up in technology. Because there are only certain people in the room, right? Making decisions and driving decisions. Now, yes, that's beginning to change, but generally we're talking about 20% or less than 20% of people of color, being in positions of influence like that.
So would you say the education piece is really, really important? When I talk about education, because I think, when you began to respond to Sasha, and by the way, she says absolutely, so she agrees with you. Well, would you, in the beginning, you said sometimes it's not intentional.
Exactly.
And so really it's incumbent upon us to have these kind of candid dialogues, right? And just have them and say, hey, this is what you think you know, but this is really what you don't know. And not from a position of, say, condescending or antagonistic, but hey, we all have a life to live, right? So let's have this conversation.
Yeah, so I think let me just say something really quickly. And I think this is important because, I don't want to dismiss or ignore the fact that there are people who are racist and it is intentional, right?
Yeah.
But I think the vast majority of the people that we encounter, right? It's not that they intend to be racist or that they are intentionally going out to keep you down or to withhold opportunity for you. They have been afforded a privilege that they live into every day. And most of the time, and this is what I found in my experience, is that they don't even recognize what you're going through.
Mhm.
They don't recognize the challenge or the experience you have. Why? Because that's not the water they swim in. They don't have to. They don't. But in a very similar example is us being able-bodied with people who are disabled. We don't know what it's like to maneuver to get into a door or into a building in a wheelchair. Why? Because we've never lived that experience. And so most of the time we don't even think about it. We plan events and haven't even considered what it's going to be like if somebody who's disabled has to walk in a door. Now, I know that people, we could talk about all of our baggage and history, and I'm not minimizing that as well. But what I'm saying is that a lot of times people don't know. They don't see it. They don't recognize it. And I've been guilty of being angered and mean or upset because I think you should know. How couldn't you know? Right. But because I don't live in that environment, because I don't have to navigate those waters, I don't see it. And so part of what happens, right, we would say, well, it's their responsibility to learn. They should learn. And people would say, in this environment, how is it that you're not trying to open yourself up to learn? And it's been comfortable doing what I do, like we talked about earlier, those mental shortcuts. And I live in that every day. And when I'm busy and running to do the things that I have to do, I automatically go to what I know. We do it all the time. The problem is for white people in particular, white people in power, that has an adverse impact on a whole community because it continues to perpetuate things that we've seen over time. And so now we're challenging people, particularly in this time after all the racial unrest that we saw last year. And then, now people with their lack of willingness to kind of be okay with what we've seen. Now we're challenging people and saying, we need to have this discussion. We need to be brave enough to talk about this. We're calling on you to interrupt your bias. People don't even realize they have bias. We all have it.
Bias.
We
Yes.
all have it, right?
Yes.
Now I want you to recognize it so you can be intentional to interrupt it and then create space. That's what we're and that comes with conversation, right?
I love
comes
it.
with conversation.
Just to wrap this all up, this has been really awesome. And Diya, we thank you so very much for it. So in one or two quick sentence, what would you want to do to change the world? And I'm just saying,
one.
We'll give you two sentences to change the world, right?
One or two sentences. Okay. So so I don't think change doesn't come unless we're willing to confront things, right? And so my wish, if we really wanted to change the world, that we could do this in one or two things, it would be the willingness to confront and own up to the history that we've had, but be courageous enough to no longer be comfortable with what is and be willing to create a new reality. And for me, that means that some of us are going to have to give up positions of power and influence and be willing to create space and opportunity. It means that we're going to have to examine ourselves, interrupt our biases, create opportunity for others, and live peaceably with all men.
That's it.
Love it. Thank you so very much, Diya. No, I need to lean on you one more time. So,
okay.
What is something you would share with girls or other Black or African Americans looking for roles in STEM?
Okay, so we talked about like embracing opportunities to get exposed, right? And some of the things that we could do to do that. But I think the big thing, right, is a shift in mindset. And so my first thing would be is to know that your past is not a predictor of your future. I experienced a lot with abuse in my family, with sexual abuse, with growing up poor, right? And so everything about my past would probably say that I shouldn't be where I am. And so for me, it is, knowing that what you experience in your past, you can overcome, right? It doesn't have to be a predictor of your future. And the other thing is, resist the urge to assimilate. A lot of us, when we move into careers and we get into positions, and if we're in corporate America, in environments where there are not people that look like us, the intention is to want to hide, not to be seen, right? We want to just fit in so that, hopefully they won't bother us, they won't ignore us or whatever. But we weren't built for that, right? You have something uniquely you that the world needs. And so, my encouragement is not to assimilate. Be you, or like the kids say, do you, right? Do you, boo? Like resist the urge. Resist the urge to assimilate, because
Oh,
at some point that's going to rise up and you're going to lose yourself, or feel like you're losing yourself, and that's going to impede your progress in every aspect of your life. And so you're only best at being the person that you are. And so that, I think, is really important. I did it. I assimilated. I'm saying this not because I heard it good from somebody else. I'm saying this because I finally have learned, that I can't hide and I can't fit into their mold or their box, and I can't be like them. That didn't work. And I tried for years, and it doesn't work. Right. And so the best you that you can be is you.
yeah. Oh, I got resist the urge to assimilate. This is huge. It's a nice little closing for us. That is huge, folks. If you've been watching and you were wondering what it is, this is Candid Dialogues with Plummer and Lorraine. We talk about things that matter to you and things that matter to us. We just had a wonderful interview here with Diya Wynn. Thank you so much. I am going to, folks, listen to this whole interview again. Share with someone, okay? Because she dropped so many valuable nuggets. So for me, my big takeaway is resist the urge to assimilate. I, like you, I've been living in America longer than I lived in Sierra Leone. And for me, when I first came here, assimilation was a big thing. But I recognized real quickly that, Plummer, if you do this, you're going to be miserable.
Yeah.
Be your authentic self.
That's right.
I teach seminars all across the country. And one of the first things I tell them when I introduce myself, I give them my whole name. Plummer Bamasa Fashidere Kashidere Kakr Kakr Boso Azombana Kinkin II. That's too much for you. Call me the African Prince. I want folks to know who I am. You deal with me. You deal with me from what I present to you. Thank you so very much.
That's good. Yes.
Yes, we appreciate you taking your Sunday that you will be using with your family to come and join us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Enjoyed the conversation. I truly did.
I got to share one thing from Cordelia. Says, wow, what an education for me. I need to pay more attention when I click on accepting cookies. Thank you so very much, dear. We love you. Please say hi to the guys for me, right? She's got a house full of guys.
Boys.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. Dear.
Thank you. Take care.
Oh my goodness, this has been wonderful, folks. Thank you so much. Hey, listen, share this, and I'll say this, our YouTube channel is growing. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please log on to YouTube, do a search for Candid Dialogues and subscribe. Make sure that bell, you click on that bell so that when we do come on, you get a notification. If you haven't subscribed to the Candid Dialogues on Facebook, do that as well.
All right. This has been sweet.
Yes.
Thank you guys for joining us. We are always looking for new and innovative ways to service you.
Yes.
So we're excited about our time with you each time we come on. Again, just go ahead and like, share, subscribe.
That's right. Next week, we've got a power couple coming up, and they're going to be talking about couples working together, doing business together. So if you are married, if you are
consider a
business, if you're in a relationship with anyone, right, come together and join us next week, and it will be powerful. Okay. Remember, we say success is only
one candid
dialogue away. We'll see you guys next week.